My beloved child, there is a detail hidden inside this story that changes the meaning of everything you thought was happening. Do not rush past these words, because the third party did not expect your family to reveal what they knew about your soulmate, and the reaction that followed was not what anyone in that room had prepared for. For a long time, the third party had been working with an incomplete picture. He believed he understood your soulmate's feelings. He believed certain distances meant certain things, that silence could be interpreted as an answer, and that whatever connection existed between you and this person belonged safely in the past. Then your family revealed one detail. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Almost casually. And somehow, that made it even more powerful. They spoke about the way your soulmate changes whenever your name enters a conversation. They described something the third party had never been able to explain. The sudden quietness, the thoughtful expression, the strange way this person seems to become emotionally present even when trying to appear unaffected. But that was only the surface. Stay close, because the next detail is where the atmosphere truly shifted. Someone in your family mentioned that your soulmate had never completely closed the door on you. There had been hesitation. There had been unanswered questions. There may even have been periods when both of you seemed to be moving in completely different directions. Yet underneath all of it remained something unfinished. A connection that had never received its final sentence. The third party went unusually quiet. And perhaps you are wondering why. Because hearing that information from your family was different from guessing it alone. Suddenly, little moments began connecting inside his mind. Conversations he had dismissed. Changes in your soulmate's mood. Questions your soulmate had asked without explaining why. Even those moments when this person seemed physically present but mentally somewhere far away. What if those moments were never random? What if they were pieces of something the third party simply did not understand until your family unknowingly placed them together? This is where the story takes an unexpected direction. The third party could have reacted impulsively. Instead, he became observant. Very observant. Because the revelation did not simply make him curious about you. It made him question everything he believed about your soulmate. And one question began circling through his thoughts. If this connection still matters, what happens next? There is something important about that question. It means the situation has moved beyond assumptions. Your family's words created awareness. And awareness changes behavior. The third party began thinking about doing something nobody expected, not to create chaos, not to force an outcome, but to discover the truth for himself. He wants to understand why your soulmate has never been able to speak about you like an ordinary memory. He wants to know why your name carries a different emotional weight. And most unexpectedly, he may be considering stepping aside long enough to see what your soulmate actually chooses without outside influence. Read that again in your heart. Because sometimes the biggest shift is not someone fighting harder. Sometimes it is someone finally stopping long enough to recognize what has been standing in front of them. But there is another layer your family revealed. And this one affected him even more. They spoke about you. Not as someone desperately waiting. Not as someone trying to prove their importance. They described someone who had been growing quietly. Someone learning to value peace over confusion, clarity over chasing, and self-respect over uncertain promises. That changed the third party's perspective. Because suddenly, you were no longer an invisible character in someone else's story. You became real. Your history became real. And the possibility that your soulmate still carries genuine feelings became impossible for him to dismiss so easily. Now watch where this turns. The plan forming in the third party's mind may involve a conversation. A surprisingly calm one. A conversation where your soulmate could finally be asked the question everyone has avoided. Who do you actually want beside you when everything else becomes quiet? No family expectations. No outside voices. No pressure. Just truth. And if that question is asked, your soulmate may no longer be able to hide behind uncertainty. Because somewhere inside this entire situation lies a choice that has been delayed for far too long. You might miss the turning point if you leave the story here. There is one more reason the third party reacted so strongly to your family's revelation, and it has almost nothing to do with jealousy. It has to do with something your soulmate apparently said when nobody expected your name to come up. A simple sentence. But once the third party learned about it, his entire plan began changing. And when you hear what those words meant, you may finally understand why this unexpected next move could bring everyone closer to the truth they have been avoiding. The sentence sounded ordinary until everyone realized what your soulmate was actually admitting. There had been no dramatic announcement. No carefully prepared confession. Your name entered the conversation almost by accident, and for a brief second, your soulmate had every opportunity to change the subject. But they didn't. Instead, after a long pause, they said something remarkably simple. I never stopped wondering what could have happened if we had understood each other better. Those words reached the third party differently than anyone expected. Because this was no longer someone else interpreting your soulmate's behavior. These were your soulmate's own feelings slipping through the careful boundaries they had built around themselves. And suddenly, your family's earlier revelation made sense. The distant expressions. The unfinished conversations. The unusual silence whenever someone mentioned you. Even the small questions your soulmate had occasionally asked about how you were doing. Pieces that once appeared unrelated were beginning to form one picture. But stay with this, because the third party's next reaction is where the story becomes far more unexpected. He did not immediately challenge your soulmate. He did not demand explanations. He started asking himself whether he had misunderstood the entire situation. Perhaps your soulmate had not been confused about two people. Perhaps they had been confused about two versions of their future. One future looked predictable, comfortable, easy to explain. The other carried your presence inside it, and that future felt uncertain, emotionally deeper, and impossible to understand without confronting everything that had remained unsaid between you. There is a difference between choosing what feels familiar and choosing what feels meaningful. The third party was beginning to see that difference. And instead of planning to hold tighter, something surprising entered his mind. He considered creating distance. Not disappearing. Not turning the situation into conflict. Just stepping away from the center of the story long enough to observe what your soulmate would do when nobody was guiding the direction. Think about that carefully. If someone removes every outside influence, what remains? Choice. Pure choice. And perhaps that is exactly what the third party now wants to see. Because your family revealed another detail he could not ignore, whenever your soulmate imagined major future decisions, somehow questions about you kept returning. Would you understand them now? Had you changed? Would things be different if the two of you spoke honestly? Had too much time passed? Or had time actually prepared both of you for a conversation you were not ready to have before? Those were not the questions of someone who had completely forgotten. They were the questions of someone trying to understand unfinished emotion. And here is where your own position in this story becomes important. You do not need to chase an answer. You do not need to compete for anyone's attention. Sometimes the strongest presence is the person who refuses to force the next chapter. Your growth can speak quietly. Your boundaries can speak. Your peace can speak. And if someone truly wants a place in your future, eventually their actions must speak too. That is why the third party's plan may unexpectedly work in your favor, not because anyone is guaranteed to choose anyone, but because removing pressure can expose what people genuinely want. Something else happened shortly afterward. Your soulmate noticed the change. The third party became quieter around certain conversations. Less eager to redirect the subject whenever you were mentioned. More willing to let your soulmate finish a thought. Your soulmate noticed immediately. And that created an unfamiliar feeling. Space. For perhaps the first time in a long while, nobody was telling this person what they should feel. Nobody was translating their emotions for them. They had to hear themselves. And what they heard surprised them. If this story is speaking to something you have experienced, you can share it with someone who might understand the message. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe if you enjoy these slow revealing journeys. Then stay with me, because we have not reached the most revealing moment yet. Later, when your soulmate found themselves alone, one question returned. If I could speak to them without explaining myself to anyone else, what would I say? The answer did not arrive immediately. First came memories. Not perfect memories. Real ones. The misunderstandings. The laughter. The moments when neither of you knew how to say what needed to be said. Then something deeper appeared. Your soulmate began imagining a conversation with you not about yesterday, but about tomorrow. That distinction matters. Because remembering someone belongs to the past. Imagining how they might fit into your future is something entirely different. And the third party may already sense that shift. His unexpected plan is becoming clearer. Rather than controlling the answer, he may be preparing to ask your soulmate directly what they truly want, and then respect whatever truth comes back. But there is one thing he does not know yet. Your soulmate has apparently already considered reaching out. And there is a specific reason they have hesitated. It is not because they have nothing to say. Quite the opposite. They are wondering whether you would still be willing to hear it. Because if that conversation happens, one question your family asked your soulmate may finally receive its answer. And that question could change the direction of everything that follows. Then the silence broke in a way nobody had prepared for. Your soulmate was asked one question by your family, and for once, there was nowhere to hide behind vague answers. If you had one completely honest conversation with this person, what would you want them to know? Everything became still. Your soulmate looked away. Not because there was no answer. Because there were too many. They could have laughed it off. They could have said the past belonged in the past. They could have offered some safe, convenient sentence and ended the conversation there. Instead, something far more revealing happened. Your soulmate quietly admitted, "I would want them to know that my silence never meant they were unimportant." That was the moment the third party understood. Not everything, but enough. Enough to recognize that whatever existed between you and your soulmate could not be reduced to an old chapter that everyone should simply forget. There were unanswered questions underneath it. Feelings that had never been properly translated into words. Decisions that had been postponed because timing, uncertainty, and outside expectations had made honesty difficult. And strangely, the third party stopped looking at you as competition. He started looking at the situation as unfinished truth. That difference changed his plan completely. Stay a little longer, because what he decided next was the opposite of what everyone expected. Instead of trying to influence your soulmate, the third party decided he wanted clarity. Real clarity. He was considering telling your soulmate something surprisingly mature. Don't make your decision because of me. Figure out what you actually want. Imagine hearing that after expecting resistance. Suddenly the emotional walls disappear. The excuses disappear. The convenient answers disappear. And your soulmate is left standing before the one person they cannot avoid forever, themselves. What would they choose without pressure? What would they say if nobody judged the answer? And perhaps most importantly, why does the possibility of speaking with you still carry so much weight? Your soulmate began realizing something quietly powerful. Maybe the unresolved connection was never asking them to recreate the past. Maybe it was asking them to finally understand it. There is a difference. You are not the exact person you were then. Neither are they. Time has changed priorities. Experience has softened certain edges and strengthened others. Things that once seemed impossible to discuss may now be surprisingly simple. And this is where your story moves away from memory and toward possibility. Because your soulmate apparently started thinking about how they would approach you. Not with some overwhelming declaration. Not with promises about a future nobody can guarantee. Something smaller. Something human. A message. Perhaps only a few words. Can we talk? But they stopped themselves. Why? Because another question appeared immediately. What if they have finally found peace without me? That thought affected your soulmate more deeply than expected. They had spent so much time wondering whether you still cared that they had barely considered something else. You might have grown beyond needing an answer. And somehow, that realization made honesty feel even more important. Because reaching out should not be about pulling you backward. It should be about meeting who you have become. Pause there. That distinction could determine everything. If your soulmate approaches you from nostalgia alone, the conversation may remain trapped in yesterday. But if they approach with accountability, curiosity, and respect for who you are now, something completely different becomes possible. Not necessarily a reunion. Not necessarily an ending. Clarity. And clarity can be powerful enough on its own. Meanwhile, the third party's unexpected plan was moving forward. He wanted one private conversation with your soulmate. No audience. No family involvement. No assumptions. He wanted to ask directly whether part of their heart was still waiting for an answer from you. And when that conversation finally happened, your soulmate did something nobody anticipated. They did not immediately say yes. They did not say no. They asked, "Would you think differently of me if I told you the truth?" The third party remained quiet for a moment. Then came the response that shifted the entire emotional direction of this story. "I would think differently of you if you never gave yourself the chance to find out what the truth actually means." Your soulmate was stunned. Because suddenly, the person they expected to become an obstacle had become the person refusing to let them hide. What if the unexpected plan was never about separating two people? What if it was about ending the uncertainty? That night, your soulmate looked at their phone differently. Your name was no longer simply connected to memory. It represented a decision. Reach out, or finally accept the silence. And for several minutes, your soulmate apparently stared at the place where a message could begin. They typed something. Deleted it. Started again. Stopped. Then wrote one sentence they had never managed to say before. But before sending it, another revelation from your family returned to their mind. Something about you that nobody had told your soulmate until recently. Something that made them realize the next message could not be casual anymore. Because once they understood what you had quietly done during all this time, they knew that if they contacted you now, they would have to come with something stronger than emotion. They would have to come with truth. What your family revealed next did not pull your soulmate backward, it forced them to see how far you had moved forward. They learned that while everyone else had been analyzing the connection, wondering who would speak first and guessing what might happen next, you had been quietly rebuilding your own direction. You were not standing still. You had been learning what deserves your energy and what does not. Learning that unanswered questions do not have to control your days. Learning that caring about someone and waiting endlessly for them are two completely different things. And when your soulmate heard this, something inside their thinking shifted. Because suddenly the question was no longer, does this person still care about me? It became, am I prepared to meet them at the level they have reached? That question carries weight. Stay with it. Your soulmate had imagined contacting the version of you they remembered. But your family had just introduced them to a version of you they had not fully considered. Someone calmer, more aware, less interested in confusion, and far more protective of their own peace. The third party noticed the change in your soulmate immediately. There was no dramatic reaction. Just stillness. The kind of stillness that appears when someone realizes they cannot return to an old situation using an old version of themselves. And this is where the third party did something even more unexpected. He asked your soulmate, if you reach out, what are you actually offering? Your soulmate had no quick answer. Think about how powerful that question is. Not, what do you feel? Not, who do you choose? But what are you offering? Honesty? Consistency? A conversation? An apology for misunderstandings? A genuine attempt to discover whether two people who once mattered deeply to each other could understand one another differently now? Because feelings can begin a conversation. But feelings alone cannot build what comes afterward. Your soulmate understood that. And perhaps this was the real reason the third party had entered this part of the story, not simply as someone standing between two people, but as someone unexpectedly holding up a mirror. He had originally wanted answers about you. Instead, he found himself questioning your soulmate. If this person matters so much, why have you waited? The answer came slowly. Because I didn't know whether reaching out would make things better, or disturb the peace they finally found. There it was. The hesitation. Not emptiness. Not indifference. Uncertainty. And your family's revelation had made that uncertainty impossible to ignore. But something else was changing too. The third party was beginning to understand that no person can permanently occupy a place that someone else has not freely chosen for them. You cannot negotiate genuine connection. You cannot manufacture emotional certainty. Eventually, everyone involved deserves the truth. That realization transformed his plan. He would not interfere. He would not carry messages between you. He would not attempt to predict your response. He simply told your soulmate that if they had something sincere to say, they should decide whether they were courageous enough to say it respectfully, and mature enough to accept whatever answer returned. That final part mattered. Because you have a choice too. Sometimes stories about love focus so intensely on the person returning that they forget the person receiving the message has their own heart, their own boundaries, their own future. Your soulmate does not get to decide the ending alone. Neither does the third party. Neither does your family. You do. And somehow, realizing this made your soulmate even more careful about the message they were preparing. If this journey is resonating with you, you might share it with someone who appreciates stories about clarity and second chances, leave a comment with the line that stayed with you, and subscribe if you want to continue these cinematic journeys together. Now come back to this moment, because the next detail changes the atmosphere completely. Your soulmate opened the unfinished message again. The first version was emotional. They deleted it. The second explained too much. They deleted that too. Then they understood something. They did not need the perfect words. They needed honest ones. So they began differently. I don't know where life has taken you emotionally, and I don't want to assume anything. But there is something I should have told you a long time ago. Their finger stopped above the screen. Because now the message was real. No dramatic promises. No expectation that you would respond in a certain way. Just an opening. A doorway. And somewhere nearby, the third party had absolutely no idea whether your soulmate would actually press send. But he had already made his own decision. Whatever happened next, he would stop trying to control a story that required two other people to discover their own truth. That was the unexpected plan. Yet just as your soulmate prepared to send the message, your family revealed one final detail. Something about the last time you had spoken about your soulmate. And those words changed what your soulmate was about to write. Because apparently, you had never described them with bitterness. You had said something far more surprising. Something that suggested the door might not be locked. But it could only be opened in one very specific way. And when your soulmate heard what that condition was, they erased the message one final time, and started writing something completely different. The condition was not what your soulmate expected to hear. Your family explained that the last time someone had asked you about this connection, you had not demanded an apology. You had not asked anyone to convince your soulmate to return. You had not even spoken as though the future had already been decided. You had simply said, "If we ever speak again, I want it to be because we are both ready to be honest, not because someone is afraid of losing someone." Those words stayed with your soulmate. Because suddenly, the message sitting unfinished on the screen felt different. They had been preparing to explain everything. Why they waited. Why they became quiet. Why certain circumstances made them hesitate. Why your name continued appearing in their thoughts even when life seemed to be moving forward. But your words revealed that explanations were not necessarily what you needed. You wanted honesty. And honesty required something more difficult than describing the past. It required your soulmate to decide what they wanted now. That realization changed the entire message. Your soulmate deleted the long paragraph. Then another. And another. Until the screen was almost empty. The third party had no idea this was happening. He had already decided to stop influencing the situation, but somewhere inside him remained one unanswered question: if your soulmate received complete freedom to choose, would they actually move toward you? Soon, he would discover the answer. Because your soulmate finally began typing again. I heard something you once said about us. It made me realize I've spent too much time explaining my silence to myself instead of being honest with you. Pause there. This was no grand promise. No attempt to pull you immediately into a relationship. It was something far more believable. Recognition. Your soulmate continued. I don't know what you want now, and I respect that your life may have changed. But if you are ever comfortable having one honest conversation, there are things I would like to say properly. Then they stopped. Read the emotional difference carefully. They were no longer asking you to rescue the connection. They were offering communication without demanding an outcome. And that was exactly the kind of change your family had been waiting to see. Because anyone can miss someone. Anyone can become emotional when memories return. But maturity appears when someone can care deeply while still respecting another person's freedom. Your soulmate looked at the message for a long time. Their finger hovered. Then something unexpected happened again. They did not send it. Not yet. Instead, they walked away from the phone. Why? Because your soulmate wanted to make sure the message was coming from clarity rather than a temporary emotional wave created by everything your family had revealed. That decision surprised even them. The old version of this story might have rushed. The new version was learning patience. And perhaps that is the hidden transformation underneath everything happening here. Your family revealed the truth. The third party reacted. Your soulmate confronted unfinished feelings. But nobody could manufacture the final answer. Time would reveal whether those feelings could become meaningful action. Hours later, the third party spoke with your soulmate again. He expected awkwardness. Instead, your soulmate appeared unusually calm. So, he finally asked. Your soulmate understood immediately. I'm going to speak to them. The third party studied their expression. When? And your soulmate gave an answer that revealed just how much their thinking had changed. When I know I'm ready to hear their truth too. That sentence mattered. Because reaching out is easy when someone secretly expects the answer they want. Reaching out while accepting that the other person may have changed requires something deeper. The third party finally understood why your family's revelation had affected him so strongly. He had entered this situation believing he needed to protect his own position. Now he realized there should never have been a position to protect. People are not prizes. Connection is not ownership. And affection cannot become meaningful when everyone involved is trying to control the ending. So his plan changed one final time. He would step completely outside the decision. No questions afterward. No persuasion beforehand. No attempt to make your soulmate feel guilty whichever direction they chose. That was unexpected. But there was another consequence nobody had considered. Once the third party stopped creating pressure, your soulmate could no longer blame circumstances for remaining undecided. There was nowhere left to hide. Your soulmate had freedom. And freedom demanded honesty. Later that evening, they returned to the phone. The message was still there. Unsent. Your soulmate read your remembered words again. Honesty, not fear. And this time, something became clear. They added one final sentence. I'm not asking you to return to anything. I'm asking whether we can understand what we never understood before. Then their hand became still. For the first time, the question was not whether they still felt something. That answer had already become obvious. The question was whether they were prepared for whatever came after pressing send. Your answer could be warm. It could be cautious. You could need time. You could decide that your peace belonged somewhere else entirely. And your soulmate finally understood that every one of those possibilities deserved respect. Then, the message was sent. No dramatic sound. No instant transformation.